all of the despair, there were some good times. I remember there was a group of young boys, inclusive myself. We used to play soccer on Sunday. Thinking of it today, I said, how did we do it? You know? How did we get the mental and physical strength to play soccer? We used to see girls. How did we do it? We did, in spite of everything that was going on. And I believe that was part of what kept myself or me keep my sanity. And the second day I was working there, when he came in from his home in the morning, he knew my name by then. He says, "Strauss, there's something in my car for you." And I looked in his car, in his backseat, there were a couple of sandwiches in his car. And again, I thought, this guy's trying to play games with me. Food is probably poisoned. And I'm going to be very careful. But then I rationalized. I said, this man doesn't have to poison me. Because I had seen him walking through camp with his pistol in his hand and shooting people in the head. He was a beast. He was an animal. He had no regard for human life, for the things he did to other people. But I was somehow able to get a relationship going with him that he helped me.
After surviving 2 harsh winters in the Riga ghetto, Bert's mother dies in the spring. In July, the German government orders the evacuation of all ghettos in the Baltic states. Bert is separated from his father and sister and marched across town to Kaiserwald labor camp. At Kaiserwald, Bert is assigned to a barrack and selected from among hundreds of men to work as the camp commandant's personal auto mechanic. Bert uses his position to persuade the commandant to relocate his sister and his father to the Kaiserwald camp. For almost a year, Bert continues to work on the commandant's 2 cars, a Citroën captured from France and a Mercedes-Benz.
The only thing that kept us warm was all of the bodies next to each other. I remember waking up one morning, or one night, this must have been during the night, and I was freezing cold. I was terribly, terribly cold. And I thought I was coming down with a fever again. And I was getting sick again. And I was trying to pull my jacket I had over my shoulders. And I was laying in a really bad position, and I was nudging the man laying next to me, who's an older man, to move a little bit so I could lay down comfortably. And he did not move. I was laying on the outside of the bunk. And as the night went on, I felt colder and colder. I finally talked to this man. And I finally realized that he was dead. He was laying there ice cold, and the cold of his body generated into my body. And I've been sleeping practically all night long with a dead man.
In September, as the Soviet army advances towards Kaiserwald, the Germans evacuate the camp. The men who can still work, including Bert and his father, are forced onto a ship and transported to Stutthof concentration camp in northern Poland. Stutthof is horribly overcrowded. Its gas chambers and crematoria operate non-stop. Yet the barracks remain packed each night, with hundreds of men sleeping 7 or 8 to a single bunk.
They sent the people who were not capable of walking anymore back into the barracks. And I said goodbye to my father. And he wanted me to stay with him. And I wanted to, and I didn't want to. It was really a difficult choice for me to make, to leave him there. My dad said to me, "Stay with me." Stay with me. I said, "Papa, I can't. I have to go." And I went, said goodbye to him. Obviously, that's the last I saw of my father.
While he is at the Stutthof concentration camp, Bert contracts typhus. He is ordered to the gas chamber, but while he awaits in line to be killed, he deliriously resolves not to die. After he wanders away, a guard catches him and beats him into unconsciousness. Bert wakes up days later in his wooden bunk, not knowing how he got there. On April 27th, as the Soviet army nears Stutthof, the German guards evacuate the camp. Bert has regained some strength, but his father can hardly move. None of the prisoners who remain at Stutthof survive.
We stayed on the sea for, I believe it was 5 or 6 days. No food, no water. And the first day, of course, everybody, held themselves back not to drink any ocean water. And there were some people on board the second day who felt it was a losing battle they were fighting. They literally drank a lot of salt water. I think it took a day or two. People went berserk and went out of their mind. Seemingly the salt water reacted, affected their brain, and they went berserk and they jumped overboard and went in the water.
Drunk SS guards force 500 men and women to march out of Stutthof, randomly shooting into the crowd. Only half of these prisoners survive the 22-mile march to Danzig, where they are locked into a warehouse overnight. The next morning, Bert and the remaining prisoners are taken to the Baltic Sea and loaded onto a barge. His second day on the barge, Bert turns 20.
Quite a few of the people on the barge went overboard and swam onto land. I couldn't swim, so obviously I stayed on the barge. Daylight broke about 8 o'clock, maybe earlier, 7 o'clock. The SS came back with the tugboat and realized and also saw that quite a few people swimming on land. They went back on land, rounded up whoever was on land, marched them into the water and killed them all, shot them all. Approximately 9:30, we saw British tanks rolling along the road and they stopped in line with where we were anchored. There were several small boats laying on land, manned the boats, rowed to the boat, to the barge where we were in. And of course they identified themselves and said they were British soldiers. They were liberating us.
The SS guards tow the barge westward, away from the attacking Soviets. On the night of May 3rd, they drop anchor just off the coast of Germany. Sounds of explosions and gunfire can be heard in the distance. When the sun comes up, the SS and their tugboat are gone.
After 2 days being in hospital, I was able to walk and get out. While we were in ghetto and concentration camps, Jews were not allowed to walk on the sidewalks. And here I'm walking the hospital grounds on the street, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Bert, Lutz, you're a free man. You don't have to walk on the street anymore." And I believe it took me about 3 or 4 weeks to realize that I was a free person.
After Bert's liberation, he is taken directly to a hospital in northern Germany. He weighs only 72 pounds. On the following day, the German army surrenders to the Allies. By September, Bert has regained his strength. In search of his sister, he returns to Gmunden, where he learns that she was killed in a labor camp near Stutthof. Bert is the only member of his family to have survived the Holocaust.
We picked up a man who wanted to hitchhike, and I got into a conversation with him, and somehow we got to talk about Jews. I brought up the subject, "Are there any Jews around?" He says, "No, there are no Jews around because Hitler killed them all." I said, "Did he kill them all?" He says, "Well, he should have killed them all. Those he didn't kill, they should be killed now." And I identified myself as one of those who hadn't been killed. All the rage and all the anger and all the frustrations I had accumulated from 1932 on to 1945, I released on that man. I did not kill him. I didn't want to kill him. I wanted him to live for the rest of his life remembering me, a Jew who had survived.
Before he immigrates to the United States, Bert works with the U.S. Army, helping to locate and identify former Nazis in the Gmunden area. As they patrol the region, he attempts to come to terms with the anger and sadness he feels for the loss of his entire family.
I remember particularly having to clean that theater. I have a particular memory of given like a small bucket and something in my hand to wash that floor, and me looking back, and that place looked so big, whether it was the stage or the downstairs, and it looked like endless. And the tears were just rolling down my eyes with that little rag, and I was afraid they're going to punish me if I don't get it done. I remember it was very, very, very emotional, and I remember just my tears were just streaming down my face, and I was doing my work, and I couldn't stop crying and looking back, and that place seemed to look bigger and bigger all the time. And I was afraid I'll never get it done.
As the German army begins to experience defeat on the battlefield, the Nazi leadership orders the evacuation of all ghettos. For ghetto populations throughout Europe, this means deportation to slave labor or death camps. 3,000 Jews from the Ostrovets ghetto are sent to Auschwitz. Paula and her family are among the few left in the labor camp. As a laborer, 10-year-old Paula is assigned to work at a Hitler youth camp where Aryan racial supremacy is taught to Christian Polish children. Paula is forced to maintain the camp's sports and entertainment facilities. Paula finishes her work that day, and even though she is terrified of the children at the youth camp who sadistically torment her with their dogs, she has no choice but to do the work that is demanded of her.
That wagon was so packed with people that we had no room to sit down. There was no room. You had to either stand or be stood on. It was just packed, and there was no air. I remember sitting on my little brother's shoulder, so that through those few little openings I could catch some air. I don't want to exaggerate. I don't know how many days. I was told a couple days we were on these wagons. And I remember sitting on my brother's shoulders a lot just to survive.
In 1944, the Allies push back the Germans on all fronts. Although the German army desperately needs soldiers to defend its territory, the Nazi leadership concentrates on its effort to kill all the Jews of Europe. On a summer day in 1944, Paula and her family, along with the other surviving Jews of Ostrovets, are sealed into a freight train and deported. The train arrives at Auschwitz, and the SS guards separate the women from the men. It is the last time Paula will see her father.
The ovens were going day and night. I mean, it never stopped. The skies were so red and burning red day and night. It just didn't make a difference whether it was night or day. The skies were afire. It was unbelievable, unbelievable. And I remember always looking up, and I had my own little dreams. I used to watch and see the clouds, and it was like bodies were floating by. I mean, in my head. I remember those clouds of red, and the stench was so thick it stuck to your body. You could never get rid of it. After a while you didn't even know the difference, because this is the way it smelled, everything. And that's when the ovens were going day and night and night and day.
Paula and her mother survived the selection at Birkenau, the death camp at Auschwitz. Along with other women, they are marched into a building, undressed, inspected for valuables, sprayed with disinfectant, and showered. Afterward, they are left standing at attention overnight. Paula and her mother are then assigned to barracks in Lager B, Block 16, near the towering smokestacks.
There were signs posted everywhere, signs. And I didn't know where I learned how to read, but I wanted to learn how to read, and I must have learned it because I could read them. I could read the signs. I was fascinated. I was absolutely fascinated by the signs. One of the signs read, "Ein Laus dein Tod," which means one louse your death. And it had a double meaning on that.
Even though she is in a death camp, Paula is an inquisitive 10-year-old who is able to maintain her interest in life despite her surroundings. The SS guards convert the former Gypsy family camp, Block 7, into a special children's block. Before long, children from around the camp are moved there. Paula is separated from her mother.
He asked us to please form like a circle around him, all around him. And all the kids just went around, and we stood around there. And he telling us that if you want to be reunited with your family, we can do it for you. All you have to do is step into the middle. And he gave us the speech, and I stepped in the middle. During those years in the camp, I had a little girl that was from our hometown, and she attached herself to me. And no matter what I did, she did. As I stepped in, almost simultaneously, she stepped in, and almost simultaneously after she stepped in, I stepped back. I mean, it was like dum bum bum, because a light bulb went up in my head and saying, how do they know who my family is? And if I do this, no, it's not good. It says preservation. I stepped back. And I tried to make her see to step back too, but she wouldn't. She just stood there. She just stood there, and he kept on talking out. And quite a few of the children stepped in, and they took him away. Well, we later found their bodies right outside after liberation. Don't forget, this was winter, and their bodies were intact. They were right outside.
In Block 7 at Birkenau, Paula sees children from all over Europe come and go, particularly twins. The chief physician at Auschwitz, Dr. Josef Mengele, frequently visits the children's block to select subjects for his brutal medical experiments. Few of these children ever return.
He gave me a cross one time like a pudding, rice pudding or some kind of a pudding. And I wanted to eat it so badly. Here was the sentry standing. Here's the electric wires. And if you touched it, you were a goner. And the space was little. And he gave me in a menashke, which is like an army, I don't know, an army container. They're made out of aluminum or whatever, or some kind of metal, which conducts electricity even worse, I think. And he passed me that along for Mother. And I took it.
Paula's brother works at Buna, the labor camp at Auschwitz. Through an intricate network of communication among prisoners, he locates Paula in Block 7. He alerts her that their mother is in another part of the camp and that she is sick. At great risk, they meet at an electrified barbed wire fence. Though she is not allowed to leave the children's block, Paula manages to sneak extra food to her mother and return unharmed.
A truck had pulled over with the bread truck, and I saw one of the breads falling under the truck. Not supposed to be there, first of all. I risked my life and I crawled under the truck and I picked up that bread. And when I got out of there, all the kids attacked me and took away my bread. I didn't even get one little piece left. I was so devastated. I was so angry that here I risked myself, my life, and I didn't even get the chance to taste it. They took everything away from me.
In the last months of 1944, with the Soviet Army rapidly approaching, the regimented camp structure breaks down. The SS guards pay little attention to their prisoners. In desperation, the starving children in Block 7 will do anything to stay alive. The rest of the camp is in turmoil. In the death camp, Jewish workers blow up a crematorium. Their rebellion is unsuccessful, but it adds to the confusion among guards and prisoners alike.
We were by ourselves. There was no Russians, no Germans, no nothing, no electricity, no nothing. First thing we all did is go into the storeroom and got bread. And I remember holding my bread under my whatever I was wearing. I had bread, wherever you touched me, I had bread. I was completely insulated, well. And the second thing we did is gone to the storerooms and got ourselves dressed warmly. So if you see on those pictures all of us wearing babushkas and nice clothes, it's because we went to the storerooms and we got ourselves dressed after the Germans left.
On January 17, 1945, as the Soviet Army draws near, the SS guards force 66,000 inmates to march out of Auschwitz. The children in Block 7 are left behind. For 10 days, the children remain unsupervised.
They took pictures. And I was lucky enough, I attached myself to one Russian soldier and I went with them on the Jeep and when they were filming. Now, the films that you see at Liberation of Auschwitz are unreal. And no human being can explain it, what it looked like. I'm sure you've seen the pictures. I'm sure you saw real pictures that they show. Well, this is what we were liberated with.
On January 27, 1945, Soviet forces liberate Auschwitz. In this archival film footage taken by the Soviet Army at liberation, Paula is the little girl holding onto the nurse's hand.
We got back to Ostrovets, so we went back to our building, where my grandfather's building, and the caretaker was no longer living in the basement apartment. She was living on the second floor in the main building, and we asked her to give us a room because a lot of other people came back with us too that were liberated. And we wanted one room so we can huddle or we be together. So she says, "You Żydowa, you Jew, you mean they didn't kill you?"
The Soviet army liberates Paula's mother from a death march just outside Auschwitz. She finds her daughter and together they leave the camp. Paula and her mother spend months making their way home through the devastated Polish countryside. On May 7th, before they reach Ostrowiec, Germany surrenders to the Allies. Paula and her mother register with the Red Cross as survivors of the Holocaust. Herschel, Paula's oldest brother, finds their names on a list of survivors and contacts them. While Paula and her mother wait to be reunited with him, 9 other Jewish survivors who have come home to Ostrowiec are killed in an outburst of anti-Semitic violence. When Herschel returns, the family flees to the American-governed section of Germany.
These are my memories. And all the bad ones I just put behind me. All the dead bodies that ended up on those wires every single morning that were cleaned up. Every single morning I stayed in Auschwitz. Or those children that never returned. Or our regular tortures every time. I seem to have put behind me and only remember the incidents. But I know as I'm talking, I realize that everything sounds so light. But it wasn't. It really wasn't. It really wasn't. I just want people to know that it wasn't a trip. That it was real hard to survive every single day.
Paula, her mother, and her brother moved to a displaced persons camp in Fürstenwald, Germany. Finally, at the age of 12, Paula is able to begin her formal education in the camp school. For the next 6 years, this DP camp will be her home while they wait for immigration visas to the United States.
There was an edict given, a ruling came out that all Jews must wear a yellow star. Of course, that immediately caused a lot of discomfort in our population. It was no big deal. But you want to wear a star, we'll wear a star. They know anyway that who is a Jew and who isn't a Jew. We were recognizable just by the way we used to dress. But the yellow star became a stigma. Many times children used to aim, throwing little stones, aiming at the star, because we also had a star on the back. So God forbid if a Jew walks, he has to be recognized in the back also. And later on, the ruling came out that Jews are not allowed to own farms, cattle. The Jews were not allowed to own stores. So since my father had a big store, the first thing they did is put a seal on the door so we could not enter the store without their presence. And the store was closed.
In 1943, as the Germans begin losing the war, the Hungarian government makes preliminary steps towards peace with the Allies. Fearing Nazi retaliation, the Hungarian government attempts to appease Adolf Hitler by enforcing restrictions on the Jewish community. In 1943, as the Germans begin losing the war, the Hungarian government makes preliminary steps towards peace with the Allies. Fearing Nazi retaliation, the Hungarian government attempts to appease Adolf Hitler by enforcing restrictions on the Jewish community. Ownership of the leather store is transferred to a non-Jewish Hungarian man. Suddenly, Saul's family has no income.
The Jews were ordered to leave our hometown on a given Sunday, take with them belongings only that they can carry, and everything else they should put in bundles or valises and put it in the synagogue, and that will follow us. I remember my father writing with an indelible pencil. You know, you stuck the indelible pencil in water and you were able to write the name on the big bundles, the big packages. Jacob Weider, as big as possible, so God forbid it shouldn't get mixed up with somebody else. And we were told to assemble, be near the house, where we will be picked up by Hungarian police. And the local community volunteered, gave us the wagons and the horses where we can put our belongings, you know, the personal belongings that we were supposed to take with us. And we were all taken to the railroad station.
In 1944, Germany loses ground on battlefields throughout Europe. In March, despite their losses, the German leadership diverts troops into Hungary and occupies the country. This maneuver enables the Germans to extend their final solution to the only major Jewish community left in Europe.
We were all pushed into the cattle cars. In the middle of the cattle car there was a pail, an empty pail. And there was also a smaller pail with water. And we were all told to go in there, men, women, children, pushed in, literally pushed in. So when they wanted to close the car, the cattle car, they really had to sort of like force people, pushing them in deeper. And suddenly we see ourselves, most of my family is there, including other people, neighbors. We are in the car. It's hard for me to describe the condition in the car. First of all, there was difficulty breathing. Everybody's standing. You can't sit down. If you sit down, that means you're taking somebody's place. There was screaming, yelling. Unfortunately, even fights broke out because people were just becoming deranged. People had to go use the facility, you know, that the pail. They couldn't wait for their next, and people were waiting there before. It created a lot of problems, which is very, very difficult to describe.
The entire Jewish population of Dove is transported to a ghetto in the nearby town of Berexas. For 2 weeks, the Germans fill this ghetto with thousands of Jews from the region. Then they empty the ghetto. The freight car containing Saul and most of Dove's Jewish population heads north into Poland.
We were immediately torn apart, meaning when I say torn apart, we were separated. Men on this side and women on this side. And with children with the women. This is the last time I saw my mother. This is the last time I saw my sister. My sister was a tall young lady. She could have survived. In fact, some other children younger than her survived. But she was helping my mother with one of the other children, with one of my brothers, helping them. And in their eyes, it looked like a mother with a child. and she wound up on the other side. I remember waving Mom, and everybody's yelling, screaming, and the German SS yelled, quiet, quiet, and you had dogs. I have never in my life seen so many vicious dogs, trying to keep us confined in line. And my mother saying, Shlomo, meaning also yelling to my father, Yankov Laser, and everything moved so fast, and you could see that they are being marched already in a different direction. And I never saw them again.
After 3 days, the train full of Hungarian Jews pulls into the station at Birkenau, the death camp at Auschwitz. Doors are unlocked and opened.
I go over to a person there who was a capo, they were ruthless, cruel, but somehow I went over to him and said, by the way, do you mind telling me where the others are, like the women and children? Where are they? When do you think we'll be able to see them? He started laughing in a very sarcastic, hysterical way. And he says, you must be crazy. Don't you see the chimney? That's the smoke. That's there already. That's them. I thought he's crazy.
Saul, his father, and his uncles survived the initial selection at Birkenau. Along with the remaining men from their transport, they are examined by SS doctors and shaved by Jewish slave laborers. Saul's father, a religious man who has worn a beard all of his adult life, is unrecognizable. As they are led outside, Saul's uncle breaks down, desperately wanting to know the whereabouts of his wife and 7 children. The SS guards order Saul, his father, his uncle, and other men from the transport to board a cattle car headed south.
My father says to me, Shlomo, tonight is Yom Kippur, we'll have services. There's no prayer book, nothing. And at that point I became what you call disrespectful. I says, Pop, for God's sake, with the Yom Kippur, how can you pray where you don't even know where your mom is, where the other Ruchel is in Israel? What are you praying? Praying for what? Praying for when? And I do know that I felt it, that he was very disappointed. Here, the holiest of the holiest, and with all what's happening, and people are still going out to pray, and I don't want to go. And I saw tears, and he even said to me, how can you do that to me? How can you, I'm your father. I didn't answer, but I said, if you're my father, what am I doing here? We should have been home.
Saul, his father, his uncle, and other Hungarian men from the transport are taken to Erlenbusch labor camp in southern Germany. There they work as slave laborers in local factories. Despite the complete transformation of their lives, Saul's father remains devout. On Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, he risks his life by arranging a secret religious service. In the end, out of respect for his father, Saul recites the ancient prayers.
Doing here, we should have been home.
Saul, his father, his uncle, and other Hungarian men from the transport are taken to Erlenbusch labor camp in southern Germany. There they work as slave laborers in local factories. Despite the complete transformation of their lives, Saul's father remains devout. On Yom Kippur, the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, he risks his life by arranging a secret religious service.
said to me,
In February 1945, as Allied forces progress towards Erlenbusch, the SS evacuates the camp. Saul, his father, and his uncle are exhausted from 10 months of relentless labor and inadequate food. Along with thousands of other prisoners, they are marched at gunpoint into central Germany. Saul and his father are forced to continue marching for 2 more weeks.
very little food, almost no food. People were dying from typhus in the hundreds and literally thousands. Wherever you went, you were stepping on bodies. And there were some people made some knives, sharpening it on one side so that you can cut, going over bodies and seeing if there's any bodies, if there's any food left. There was people, they were charcoaling, burning the meat. And part of the price was, you bring 2 pieces, 1 piece remains there, and they give you back a piece of brown charcoaled meat. I used to come to my father and beg him because I saw he's dying. He couldn't even sit up from a laying position. And so I used to plead with him, Pop, take some. Others are doing it. I see they're eating it. I named some names who's doing it. I figured if it's good enough for him. My father once or twice tried to put it near the mouth and just couldn't. Just couldn't. It just didn't go in there.
Saul and his father managed to survive the 300-mile march across Germany. They barely make it through the gates of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp before Saul's father collapses. Although Bergen-Belsen was originally built to hold 8,000 prisoners, by this time the camp is filled with 100,000 men and women. The few SS guards who remain at the camp are stationed in watchtowers to prevent escape. Though Saul is willing to do anything, he is powerless to help his father. There is no medicine, no food, no clean water, and no way out.
He comes to me and he says, Shlomo, I want you to remember this day. Your father died today. And I go to the barrack where my father is supposed to be. And as I come into the barrack, the people tell me they removed him about 5 minutes ago. What happened is when people died, they put him out the barrack, and then several times during the day, trucks came, picked up all the bodies, and put them on the truck, and then they dumped them in a mass grave. Right away, I tell the people there, do you know what direction they took him? He said, well, they took him to the nearest open grave. The other graves are full. Well, all I can tell you is I jumped into, there was a ladder, a small ladder to the grave. And I remember jumping in. And I fell, clumsy. I jumped in clumsily. I stepped on people's faces, and right away they summoned a rabbi, an English rabbi, a military rabbi. And he says to me in Yiddish, what are you doing there? So I'm saying, I'm looking for my father. What are you looking for your father? I want to ask for forgiveness for the pain I caused him. He said to me, would you mind repeating after me, Yiskadal v'Yiskadash, that's the prayer for the dead. And I repeated. I look up, I see hundreds and hundreds of people staring and watching, where they're helping me out, putting me back on a stretcher and taking me back.
On April 15th, 1945, British soldiers liberate Bergen-Belsen. They find 60,000 prisoners living among tens of thousands of dead bodies. Fearing an epidemic, they dig mass graves to bury the dead. The Red Cross evacuates the prisoners who seem most likely to survive. A few days later, a friend locates Saul at a nearby hospital. The Red Cross takes Saul to a hospital in Sweden for a lengthy rehabilitation.
I felt guilty for being alive. A lot of people experience that kind of a guilt feeling. A lot of Holocaust survivors tell me that they feel guilty for being alive, and I felt violent guilt for being alive. Why me? Why? Why did I survive? And the psychiatrist constantly tried to convince me, you did not kill your father. Your father had typhus before, the symptoms. He couldn't move. The day of liberation, he had difficulties when the gates opened. He was right there, but he laid on the floor. That he had typhus. And also, they told me that doing their own research that that the Red Cross people saw that there's any hope to save, they will save. But the people who already had the condition, they focused more on the young and they're physically able to survive. And with my uncle, they tried to persuade me, look, what would you have done? You would have killed your father if you would have picked up your uncle. Your father needed your assistance. So gradually, what can I tell you? They convinced me, or I convinced myself, that it's not my fault.
Saul is the only member of his family to survive the Holocaust. In Sweden, he recovers physically and begins confronting a future without his family.
When you talk about God will look after us, even though I was a mischievous kid and had payers and grew up in an Orthodox atmosphere, I was basically a believer. I didn't want to follow the orthodoxy, the strict fanaticism, but in my heart I was praying. I looked forward to holidays, to the Sabbath, where we all sang in a family unity. But I became, unfortunately, now, in fact, immediately after the war, I still believe there is a God. I just have too many grievances against him. In fact, I have a stupid expression. Someday when I'll die, I'll take him to court. I want to know why. I prayed to you. I cried my heart out to you. What did you do? How did you allow a madman like Hitler do to us what he did?
Saul moves to the United States in 1947. And to this day, he struggles with the impact of the Holocaust.
When friends heard that I was finally leaving, they brought all their money, they brought all their jewels, they brought everything on value they could have. Because they said, bring it to Switzerland, at least we have something after the war, keep it for us. And my sister, who was very clever in sewing, sewed into the bottom of my coat, into the hemline, into the inside of the pockets, into the inside of the sleeves, truly, truly a fortune on gems, on jewelry, on foreign currency, on everything you can possibly think. It was a very gray, I remember, a gray, very light cashmere coat.
Sylvia spends the beginning of 1943 in hiding. Secretly living in the attic of a non-Jewish friend's house, she plots different methods of escape from German-occupied territory. First, she contacts relatives in Budapest, Hungary, asking for false documents which would claim she is only half Jewish and save her from deportation. But when she hears about smugglers who transport Jews from Amsterdam to neutral Switzerland, Sylvia decides to go. Sylvia's mother, also in hiding, begs her not to go, but Sylvia leaves Amsterdam in early May. She and several other Jews hide in the back of a truck that heads south. Everything goes smoothly until the truck pulls into Gestapo headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. Sylvia is taken prisoner by the Germans.
I couldn't find my powder compact, and I was looking for it. And when I was supposed to be down, I wasn't. And then I heard him call Mr. Bowden, Mr. Unterchauffeur Bowden, screaming, 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 and I was afraid of the guy. I didn't know whether I should hide under whatever or go down and face him. And then I was afraid he would come up, so I went down. And he, in front of everybody, started humiliating me. Madam, sorry to disturb you, very, very, very ridiculous. And everybody, about 700-800 people, were of course staring. And then finally said, I can't find my powder compact. And he thought he didn't know what to make of it. Is he serious? Is he serious, a powder compact? And then he whispered to somebody else, and this guy disappeared and came back a little while later with a whole big sack of flour. And that he threw over my face and over my head and over me. And I was eating that bloody thing, and I was tasting it. It was in my eyes, and another. And he thought he would help me out with my toilet so that I have enough powder to last me for a long time. And I know that my eyes were burning, terribly burning. But I felt the humiliation much more than the pain.
Upon her capture by the Gestapo, Sylvia is taken to Malines, a camp where people from Belgium await deportation. In this transit camp, she is allowed to wear her own clothes and keep her purse and coat. Sylvia has no identification papers and pretends to be only half Jewish. This generates enough confusion among the guards to delay her deportation. While she stays at Malines, Sylvia is harassed by a senior guard, Untersturmführer Bowden. Without knowing what's coming next, Sylvia spends 3 months at the Malines transit camp planning her escape.
This cattle car ride, which now everybody who knows about Auschwitz knows about, or knows about cattle car drive, has been talked about and written about a million times, can't close to be described. First of all, now you're fenced in. Now there is that little bit of a window, like a monkey in a zoo, looking out. And it is in 1 minute so hot that even the most prudish, they have to undress. You can't help it. You have to undress. And all the time, this closed in. Can you imagine this much room to look out? And you have to say, 3 minutes for you, then the next one goes, 3 minutes for you, to breathe some air.
On August 2nd, 1943, the Malines camp commandant assembles 1,500 inmates, including Sylvia, and announces that they will be resettled to camps with better living conditions. In the summer heat, all of the prisoners are herded onto a single train.
I didn't find out where Auschwitz was, that we were in Auschwitz, until the next day, until the very next day. Not that it meant anything to me at that time. I mean, I just know it was the end of the world. It was in a country which was no country. There were no trees, there was no sky, there was no heaven, there was nothing. Only a sun which burned you. Cold at night, freezing cold at night, because it's kind of a desert climate. And something which does not belong, not that it doesn't belong, but doesn't belong to this earth. It's somewhere else.
The train proceeds through Germany and deep into German-occupied Poland. Three days after leaving the Malines camp, the train finally stops, and the doors of Sylvia's freight car slide open.
Oh, I forgot about this, which was, by the way, how could I? The worst moment in my life, 51,841. This is after we have no hair, no clothes. We have already done everything. We have nothing. That's when they line us up naked, and you hear somebody say, something's happening there. I don't know what it is. And then as you come closer, you see there is two pretty, again, very well-dressed, clean girls sitting behind a little table, and two SS men, and one grabs your arm, and the other one goes in there. It goes very fast. I know mine, I was bleeding. I think because it wasn't pointed enough anymore. And in that moment I said, this is it. Now we're nameless. We have no more identity. Why don't we ask our name? Why don't we ask anything? It doesn't matter. 51,800, what is it? 51 or whatever, 31. Which means 51,000 only at this camp were already there before me. Also without names.
On the train platform at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the German guards determine who will live and who will die. Sylvia is among the women selected for labor and marched into a building to be processed. As the guards force the women to undress, Sylvia drops her purse. They taunt her by playing soccer with it, and then take the purse and her coat along with the rest of the women's clothing. The women are showered, their heads are shaved, and they are sprayed with disinfectant. Naked, they wait in line to be tattooed with an identification number.
There you see colonies, hundreds and hundreds, walking down the camp street, not only naked, but the Muslim, they got to call the living death. They cling to each other, they drag each other, they hold on to each other, they are walked slowly to the showers. And I think it is then that you make up your mind, consciously, subconsciously, not to close your eyes, not to look down, but to see it completely, all of it. Every ghastly, crazy bit of it. Because if you don't, You don't stand a chance. You must, dear, this is when you say, I will never be hungry in here, or cold, or sick, or frightened, or shudder from what is going on. I will see it all. But I personally, I saw it like a movie. I'm watching a movie. Unfortunately, I'm in it.
After their processing, Sylvia and the other surviving women from her transport are dressed and led out to the camp road. In the hot sun, they stand at attention for hours as the guards count them over and over again.
Close your eyes not to. Behind me, a mother asked where the men are, when we're going to see the men. And she was playing, you know, like you have in the Westerners with the gun, all those fancy stuff. And then she said, idiots, don't you know when you say, I will never be hungry in here, or cold, or sick, or frightened, or shudder from what is going on. I will see it all. But I personally, I saw it like a movie. I'm watching a movie. Unfortunately, I'm in it. The whole
After hours of standing at attention, the surviving women from Sylvia's transport are led along the camp road to their barracks. They walk past a female SS guard who stands twirling her gun. During her 2 months at Auschwitz, the other prisoners from Sylvia's transport gradually disappear. Death is a constant presence. In October, Sylvia is selected for forced labor. Along with 78 other women, she is transported to Ravensbrück, a concentration camp in Germany.
It was not Auschwitz with gas chambers. But there was in the forest from the first day on, I could hear, we all could hear shooting at night, and we didn't know. It was no target practicing. They took people out, whatever reason, and they shot them.
Ravensbrück in central Germany is a women's camp with a diverse population of Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, political prisoners, criminals, and others. While she is at Ravensbrück, Sylvia is a slave laborer for a giant industrial firm with a factory nearby. When she is not needed there, she is forced to labor in the potato fields near the camp. In Ravensbrück, Sylvia communicates with an intricate network of inmates who trade news and rumors on the progress of the war. In May, the Germans crack this communication network, and those involved are confined in underground cells. 3 months later, when Sylvia is released, Ravensbrück is dangerously overcrowded with prisoners who have been marched there from camps closer to the front.
And while the Nazis were walking still around us, guarding us, and the machine guns were going and the bombs were flying, this American next to me talked to me about America. He told me what it was like, that nobody needed papers there. Everybody was driving a car, and that you could go anywhere you wanted to go. It was very strange in this German forest with the lights of the, bombs still. You hear that, and the German marching around, hearing an American talk about America. That it was really free, no papers necessary, nothing. And I remember that for 2 years, since that incident in Malin with the powder compact, I hadn't looked in a mirror, nor had I ever thought of looking in a mirror. And suddenly, I didn't want sleep or food or warmth. I just wanted to be beautiful.
In the first months of 1945, the German government negotiates with the Red Cross. They agree on a limited number of evacuations from concentration camps. When Sylvia hears of a transport of 700 women from Ravensbrück to neutral Sweden, she manages to get herself included in this evacuation. The Red Cross convoy leaves Ravensbrück under German guard, with American drivers slowly transporting the women through dangerous war zones. In the chaos of the war, the transport is bombed by a British plane and only 120 of the women survive to reach Sweden. As Sylvia recovers in a hospital, Germany surrenders to the Allied forces. At the end of the year, she returns to Amsterdam, where she is reunited with her mother and sister.
The war has not ended. They never given me a chance to fight back, to fight anybody. I mean, you know, submission, and then what? Free, what is it free? What do you mean free? How am I free? I know there are Nazis sitting in big jobs in Germany today. I know they live happily ever after in South America. It's not over. I knew it wasn't over. Why? It's a contagious disease. It spread. Nobody has ever stopped the foul, malignant seeds from spreading. Nobody. It goes on. They are the heirs of the Nazis and the heirs of their Nazis.
In 1946, Sylvia works with the British Army, helping to identify war criminals from the Ravensbrück concentration camp. Afterward, Sylvia travels to Switzerland to work in the theater. The theater is the same, but the war has caused Sylvia to change. She cannot go back to the life she had before the Holocaust. Seeking a new beginning, she applies for a visa to immigrate to the United States. On February 2, 1943, the Soviet Army defeats the German Army in the Battle of Stalingrad. This begins Germany's forced retreat from the east. On May 13th, the U.S. and British armies forced the Germans and Italians out of Africa and begin an invasion of Italy. Realizing the shift of momentum from the Axis to the Allies, the government of Hungary attempts to make peace with the Allies. Saul in Dovhé and the other Jews in Hungarian territory begin to fear a German invasion of their country. Over the course of the year, the Germans intensify their deportations of Jews. On June 11th, they order all the ghettos of Poland empty, and the remaining prisoners sent to death camps or labor camps. But Paula and her family remain in Ostrowiec, where they now work in a small labor camp. In July, all ghettos in the Baltic states are ordered closed, and Bert, along with other Jews from the Riga ghetto, is deported to the nearby Kaiserwald concentration camp. In August, Sylvia is among 1,500 Jews arriving in Poland in the freight cars of a train from Belgium. In September, the Italian army surrenders to the Allies. Although this is another major loss for the Axis, Germany is far from defeated. Much of Europe still remains under German control, and the Nazi death camps operate day and night. By year's end, nearly all of Poland's 3.3 million Jews have been murdered.
As 1944 begins, the German army is losing ground in Italy and the Soviet Union. In February, the Soviets pushed the Germans back to the original eastern Polish border, steadily approaching the Nazi death camps. Despite their retreat, German forces enter and occupy Hungary on March 19th. Between April and June, over 400,000 Hungarian Jews are deported and murdered in Auschwitz. Saul is kept alive to work in Erlenbusch labor camp in southern Germany. The Germans rely on hundreds of thousands of forced laborers to fuel their crumbling military. In central Germany, Sylvia labors at Ravensbrück concentration camp. Beginning on June 6th, known as D-Day, 2.2 million US and British soldiers land in German-occupied France. These Allied forces chase the Germans out of France by the end of August. As the American and British soldiers advance to the north, the Soviets approach Germany from the east, and the German troops are gradually forced toward the borders of their own country. This steady Allied progress forces the Nazis to move their prisoners deeper into German territory. In August, Paula and all the other inmates in the Ostrowiec labor camp are deported to Auschwitz. In September, as the Soviet army draws near the Kaiserwald labor camp in Latvia, Bert and his father are evacuated by sea to the Stutthof death camp in Poland. On September 12th, the U.S. Army crosses the southern border of Germany. For the first time, the German army must defend its own country.
Early in 1945, the Allied armies liberate town after town and camp after camp as they force the German army out of occupied territory and toward Berlin. On January 17th, the advancing Soviet army liberates Warsaw and pursues the Germans south. 10 days later, on January 27th, they liberate Paula and 7,000 other prisoners who remain at Auschwitz. As the German army continues its retreat, the SS evacuates camps near the war front. In February, Saul and the other prisoners of Erlenbusch are forced on a death march into central Germany. Allied aircraft relentlessly bomb Berlin and other German cities and destroy factories throughout Germany. Soon, the German army is in full retreat inside Germany. On April 15th, the British liberate Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in western Germany. 2 weeks later, the Soviets liberate Ravensbrück, just north of Berlin. With Berlin surrounded by Allied troops, Adolf Hitler commits suicide. On May 4th, on a barge off the coast of Germany, Bert is liberated by the British. Three days later, the Germans surrender unconditionally to Allied forces, and the war in Europe is over.
World War II leaves Europe in ruins. Millions of Europeans are physically and emotionally ravaged by what they have witnessed and experienced. As Saul spends the year recuperating in a hospital in Sweden, the Allies divide Germany into 4 occupied zones. These will be individually governed by the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1945, in order to bring the Nazi leaders and war criminals to justice, the Allies convened the Nuremberg trials and established smaller courts throughout Europe. After Sylvia returns to Amsterdam, she travels to Ravensbrück to help the British Army convict former camp guards. Bert in Gemünden helps the U.S. Army identify Nazis who persecuted his community. Much of Eastern Europe remains hostile after the war. Half of the 200,000 Polish Jews who return home from Nazi concentration camps soon leave Poland, fleeing anti-Semitic violence. Paula, her mother, and her brother leave Ostrovitz and go to the American section of Germany, where they become residents of a displaced persons camp. In the years after the war, 1 million people make their homes in these camps. The Soviet Union quickly extends its influence over all the countries of Eastern Europe. Western Europe unites against this show of strength. The Cold War is born. Life in Europe remains difficult for survivors of the Holocaust. In 1947, Saul, Bert, and Sylvia immigrate to the United States. 4 years later, Paula arrives at the age of 18.